The old wooden rocking chair creaked beneath Daniel Hayes as he sat on the porch of his sprawling Montana ranch. 70 years of weathering had etched deep lines across his face, much like the valleys carved through his land by decades of harsh winters and relentless summers. His weathered hands gently turned the pages of a leather-bound photo album, stopping at a faded sepia photograph of a train station. Clearwater Station, October 1885. 35 years ago to the day. The memory washed over him like the golden autumn light now bathing his porch. He closed his eyes, remembering that day when fate had changed everything. October 1885. Clearwater Station stood sentinel against the vast prairie, its wooden platform weathered by sun and rain. Steam billowed from the locomotive, mingling with the dust kicked up by horses and wagons. The afternoon light painted everything in amber hues as passengers disembarked, greeted by waiting family members with embraces and tears. Sarah Bennett stood alone on the platform, her small trunk at her feet. Her navy traveling dress, once fine but now worn thin at the cuffs, offered little protection against the chill October wind. Her gloved hand clutched a one-way ticket to Silver Creek, a mere scrap of paper that weighed heavy as iron. Each step toward that train would take her closer to Merchant Wallace and the marriage arranged to settle her father's gambling debts. $3,000. 6 years of her life spent taking in laundry in Topeka could never have covered such a sum. Her father had drunk himself into that hole over 2 years, then sealed her fate with a handshake. The debt would vanish if she became Mrs. Wallace, wife to a man 30 years her senior, known throughout the territory for his cold demeanor and calculating nature. The train whistle screamed across the station. Final boarding call. Sarah stood frozen, contemplating the life awaiting her, a life of obligation, not love, of duty, not choice. "Miss," the voice came from behind her, rough as gravel, urgent as thunder. Sarah turned. A man blocked the sun, tall, trail-worn, maybe 35. His expensive clothes were covered in dust from hard riding. A Colt Model 1873 hung at his hip, its handle worn smooth from years of use. His hat shadowed eyes that looked like they hadn't seen rest in months. Hands that had known hard work hung at his sides, trembling slightly. "Please come with me," he said without preamble or apology. "My twins need a mother." The platform seemed to go silent around them. Sarah felt her heart stutter in her chest. The stranger continued, desperation edging his voice. "My name is Daniel Hayes. My wife Margaret died 8 months ago from childbed fever. A sudden seizure took her. The boys are 4 years old now. They witnessed everything. They won't speak, won't eat properly. I've tried everything." His voice cracked like dry timber. "I can pay you $50 a month, protect you, give you a home." His eyes, the color of faded denim, met hers directly. They need someone who will stay." Sarah stared at him, at the naked desperation in his face, at the way his jaw trembled when he mentioned his sons. "I know how this looks," he said, "but out here we don't have time for proper courtship. We have need, raw need, and I'm asking." The conductor called final boarding. Sarah looked at her ticket, looked at this stranger, looked at the train that would carry her to a lifetime of cold duty. "How long?" she whispered. "As long as you can bear it." A woman beside them gasped at the audacity. Sarah handed the stranger her trunk. 6 months, she said, her voice steadier than her hands. "As your housekeeper, not—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Not anything else. Relief broke across his face like dawn. "Yes, thank you. Thank you." The train pulled away in a cloud of steam and smoke. Sarah watched her old life disappear, wondering if she had just made the most foolish decision of her life, or somehow the wisest. "Daniel Hayes," the man said, finally offering his hand. "Sarah Bennett," she replied, accepting his grip. His hand was warm, callous, trembling with exhaustion. "I have a wagon," he said. "It's a 2-hour ride to the ranch." Sarah nodded, picked up her carpet bag, and followed this desperate stranger into an uncertain future. Behind them, the platform erupted in whispers. The wagon wheels ground through dust and sage as Daniel guided his team along the rutted trail. Mountains rose purple in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow. The afternoon sun slanted lower, colder. Sarah sat stiffly beside Daniel Hayes, hands folded in her lap. He hadn't spoken since they left town. His knuckles were white on the reins. "The boys," he finally said. "Benjamin and Matthew. They're 4 years old. Twins." He swallowed hard. "They haven't spoken since their mother died. The ranch hands, good men all of them. They call them the ghosts because they're silent, because they drift through the house like they're already gone." Sarah said nothing, letting him talk. "They wake screaming every night. Both of them." His voice broke. "I go to them, but I don't know what to say, how to comfort them. I'm their father and I can't." "You're doing your best," Sarah said quietly. "My best killed their mother." The words hung between them like a noose. Sarah turned to look at him, really look at him. She saw the shadows under his eyes, the way his shoulders curved inward like he was trying to disappear. "How did she die?" Sarah asked softly. "She had been having headaches for months after the boys were born. I thought it was just fatigue from caring for twins." His jaw tightened. "Now I know they were warning signs of eclampsia. I ignored them." He drew a ragged breath. "I was out checking fence lines when the first seizure hit. When I returned, I found her on the kitchen floor. The boys were screaming beside her. I tried to get her to the doctor, but it was too late." Sarah felt the weight of his guilt like a physical presence between them. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be. It was my fault." They rode in silence for a long moment. The wind carried the scent of sage and coming winter. "Why were you on that train?" Daniel asked. Sarah stiffened. "Does it matter?" "You agreed to come with a stranger to raise his children. That takes courage or desperation." He glanced at her. "I'm guessing both." She looked at her hands, at the calluses from years at the washing board. "A merchant in Silver Creek held my father's debts," she said. "Hostenal, $3,000. My father drank himself into that hole over 2 years. The merchant offered a bargain. Marry him and the debt disappears. You were buying your father's freedom with your own." "Yes." Daniel nodded slowly. "Then maybe we're both running from something." "Or towards something," Sarah said quietly. He looked at her with something like hope. They crested a ridge as the sun touched the horizon. Below them, a sprawling ranch spread across the valley. Corrals, barns, a large house with dark windows. The land stretched out around it, vast and beautiful. "Hayes Ranch," Daniel said. 3,000 acres. Cattle, horses, timber rights, worth a fortune." His voice turned bitter. None of it could save her. Sarah studied the house. Beautiful, isolated, lonely as a grave. "The town," Daniel continued, "they already buried my wife with their prayers and casseroles. Now they'll bury me with talk." He glanced at her. "You need to know people will judge you harshly." "Let them," Sarah said. Daniel almost smiled. "You're braver than I am." "No, just tired of other people's opinions." They descended toward the ranch as twilight swallowed the valley. The front door swung open to reveal a cold, silent house. Sarah stepped inside and her breath caught. The house was grand. Hardwood floors, a stone fireplace, expensive furniture. But it felt abandoned. Dust covered the mantel. Children's toys lay scattered like wreckage. No curtains on the windows. No warmth anywhere. A house, not a home. "Mr. Hayes." An older man appeared from the kitchen, 60-something, weathered face, kind eyes. A small scar along his jaw spoke of battles fought long ago. "You brought her." "Sarah Bennett," Daniel said. "Sarah, this is Mr. Sullivan, my foreman." Mr. Sullivan studied her with the careful assessment of a man who had seen too many things go wrong. "The boys?" Daniel asked. "In their room, won't come down for supper." Daniel's shoulders sagged. "May I see them?" Sarah asked. Both men looked at her with surprise. "They don't," Daniel started. "I know," Sarah said gently. "May I try?" Daniel nodded, led her upstairs. The boys' room was at the end of the hall. Daniel knocked softly, pushed the door open. Two small figures sat on separate beds, backs to the door. Identical dark hair, thin shoulders, bare feet. One clutched a wooden horse. The other stared at the wall. Sarah's heart broke. She walked slowly into the room, knelt between the beds. Neither boy looked at her. "Hello," she said softly. "My name is Sarah." Silence. "I came a long way today, from a train station. Your papa asked me to come help." The boy with the wooden horse, Benjamin, she guessed, turned his head slightly. His eyes were huge, haunted. "I lost my mama when I was small too," Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the tears in her throat. When I was 6 years old, she got sick, and one morning she was just gone. She took a slow breath. It's the worst pain in the world, and nobody can fix it, not even papas who try very hard. Matthew, the other twin, turned his head now, looked at her with eyes too old for his small face. I'm not here to replace your mama, Sarah said. Nobody could do that. I'm just here to help, to be here if you need someone, if that's all right with you. Benjamin's hand tightened on the wooden horse. Sarah stood slowly. I'll be downstairs if you need anything, or if you just want someone to sit with you. She turned to leave, stopped. Your mama must have loved you very much. She left the room, found Daniel standing in the hallway, tears streaming down his face. That night, Sarah unpacked in the small room off the kitchen. She could hear the house settling, wind rattling windows, and then the screaming began. Both boys wailing in terror from their nightmares, heavy footsteps above. Daniel's voice helpless and broken. Shh, boys, Papa's here. You're safe. But the screaming continued. Sarah climbed the stairs, pushed open the door. Daniel stood between the beds, hands hovering uselessly. The boys thrashed, unseeing. Usulmung. Sarah moved past him, sat on the floor between the beds, reached out slowly, carefully, and placed one hand on each small back. She began to hum a lullaby her own mother had sung, Home Sweet Home, a song beloved by soldiers during the Civil War. The screaming quieted, the boys' breathing slowed. Sarah kept humming, kept her hands steady and warm on their small backs. Benjamin turned toward her, curled into his pillow. Matthew's hand crept out from under his blanket, found the edge of Sarah's skirt, gripped it. She kept humming until both boys slept. When she finally looked up, Daniel was watching from the doorway. His face was raw, grateful, destroyed. Thank you, he mouthed. Sarah nodded, carefully extracted herself, followed him downstairs. In the kitchen, Daniel poured 2 cups of coffee with shaking hands. They haven't slept through a night since... He couldn't finish. They will again, Sarah said. It takes time. He looked at her. Why did you really get on that train to marry that merchant? Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm cup. My father loves whiskey more than he loves me. As for Wallace, he's 53 years old. Cold. He told me I'd bear him sons and keep his house and never embarrass him in public. She met Daniel's eyes. I was 48 hours from a lifetime sentence when you appeared. Maybe Providence sent me to that station, Daniel said quietly. Or desperation. Maybe they're the same thing. On the mantel, Sarah noticed a framed daguerreotype photograph. A beautiful young woman with kind eyes and dark hair. Margaret Hayes, the ghost in this house. Sarah looked away, finished her coffee, said goodnight. In her small room, she lay awake listening to the silence above. The boys slept for the first time in 8 months, according to Mr. Sullivan's whispered comment to Daniel. They slept. Sarah closed her eyes, wondered what she had agreed to. Wondered if she'd have the strength to leave in 6 months. Wondered if she'd want to. 3 weeks passed like water wearing stone. Sarah woke before dawn every day, started the stove, made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. When Daniel came down, always exhausted, always grateful, she had breakfast ready. The boys appeared slowly. Benjamin first, cautious, then Matthew, always 3 steps behind his brother. Sarah taught them their letters by lamplight, read to them from the books, gathering dust in the parlor, taught them to knead bread, to gather eggs, to recognize the tracks of deer and rabbits in the frost. Benjamin began speaking single words at first, yes, no, please, then phrases. May I have more? Sarah, look! Matthew remained silent, but he shadowed Sarah everywhere. His small hand found hers during walks. His eyes tracked her across rooms like she might disappear. Daniel watched all of this with something like wonder. He taught Sarah to ride, to shoot. The land doesn't forgive mistakes, he said, steadying her hands on the rifle. Neither do wolves. She learned quickly, proved herself capable. They fell into a rhythm. Dawn chores, midday lessons, evening meals, quiet hours by the fire. Sarah noticed things, the way Daniel's hands stopped trembling, the way Benjamin laughed, actually laughed, when Mr. Sullivan showed him how to rope a fence post, the way Matthew hummed Sarah's lullaby to himself. Healing, slow and painful as a wound closing, but healing. One day, Sarah found a small box hidden under Matthew's bed. Inside were treasures: a ribbon, a carved wooden bird, a silver maple leaf brooch, items that had belonged to their mother secreted away like talismans against forgetting. Sarah placed everything back exactly as she found it, but that night she placed the photograph of Margaret on the boy's dresser. "Your mama," she told them. "She should be here with you." But the town noticed their arrangement too. The supply run to Clearwater came 4 weeks after Sarah's arrival. She rode beside Daniel in the wagon, the boy bundled in blankets behind them. The moment they entered town, the whispers started. Women turned away, pulled their children close. Sarah heard the words clearly. Shameless. That poor woman barely cold in her grave. What kind of father? Daniel's jaw clenched. He helped Sarah down from the wagon like she was made of glass. Inside the general store, the silence was crushing. Mrs. Patterson, the owner's wife, served them with tight lips and cold eyes. Outside, Sheriff Caldwell appeared, 50-something, ambitious eyes, politician smile, a Remington 1875 revolver at his hip and a golden badge on his chest. "Hayes," he said, "word around town is you've got yourself a housekeeper." "I do," Daniel said evenly. "She got papers, references. She's got employment. That's all the law requires." The sheriff's smile turned sharp. "People are asking questions. You two married proper? Or is this some kind of arrangement?" Daniel stepped forward. "My private business is exactly that. Private. Not when it involves children," the sheriff said. "Not when folks worry about their moral welfare." He glanced at Sarah. "No offense, ma'am, but you can understand the concern. Unmarried woman alone with a widower and his boys. Looks bad." Sarah felt heat rise to her face. Not shame, anger. "Those boys are thriving," she said quietly, "for the first time in months. If the town's morality is more concerned with appearances than with children's happiness, then the town has forgotten what morality means." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Careful, ma'am. You're new here. You don't know how things work." "I know bullies when I see them," Sarah said. Daniel took her arm gently. "We're done here." They loaded supplies in silence. The boys sensed the tension, pressed close to Sarah on the ride home. Daniel finally spoke. "I'm sorry, I should have warned you better." "It's not your fault." "It is." He glanced at her. "There's something you should know. My wife's parents, the Montgomerys, they live in St. Louis. Railroad money." Sarah listened intently. "They've been making noise about custody." Sarah's blood went cold. "They want the boys." His eyes darkened. "They want my land. The railroad's expanding west. My property sits right in their planned route." His hands tightened on the reins. "If they can prove I'm unfit, they get guardianship, which means they control everything until the boys come of age. And a woman living in your house unmarried gives them ammunition." Daniel nodded grimly. "I brought you into danger. I'm sorry." Sarah looked back at the twins bundled together, Benjamin's head on Matthew's shoulder, both finally at peace after months of terror. "Then we don't give them ammunition," she said firmly. That night, Sarah found legal papers in Daniel's study, a petition for emergency custody evaluation dated 2 weeks ago. The storm was coming. The first heavy snow fell in mid-November. Sarah woke to a world transformed. White, silent, beautiful. The boys pressed their faces to the window, breath fogging glass. "Can we go outside?" Benjamin asked, his voice still tentative, still testing if the world would answer kindly. "Bundle up," Sarah said. They built a snowman in the yard. Benjamin found stones for eyes. Matthew carefully placed a carrot nose. Sarah wrapped her old scarf around its neck. From the barn, Daniel watched them. Suddenly, Matthew laughed, bright and pure, his laughter carried across the frozen air. Daniel froze. He couldn't remember the last time he'd heard that sound. That evening, the boys fell asleep early, exhausted and happy. Sarah sat by the fire, mending one of Benjamin's shirts. Daniel poured 2 cups of coffee, sat across from her. "They're different," he said. "Since you came, his voice caught. "They're alive again." Sarah's needle paused. "They were always alive, just hurting. I couldn't reach them. I tried everything." "You loved them," Sarah said gently. "That's not nothing." Daniel stared into his cup. "I need to tell you something more about the day Margaret died." Sarah set down her mending, listened. She had been having terrible headaches. I told her it was just exhaustion from the twins. She wanted to see the doctor, but his voice went rough. I said we couldn't spare the money for something so trivial. He looked at Sarah, eyes devastated. I was building a new barn. Every spare penny went to lumber. I told her to rest more, that she was imagining things. Daniel, Sarah whispered. I found her on the kitchen floor. The boys were screaming. She was convulsing. By the time I got her into the wagon, she was barely breathing. We never made it to town. His voice broke. I held her hand while she died, promising I'd take care of them, that I'd be enough. You are enough, Sarah whispered. I'm not. I can't cook worth a damn. Can't comfort them when they scream. Can't sing lullabies or teach them gentleness. I killed her with my pride, Sarah, and now I'm failing them too. Sarah stood, crossed to him, knelt beside his chair. Grief is lying to you, she said fiercely. Your wife chose you, chose this life, chose to bring those boys into this world. She didn't die because of your pride. She died because childbirth and its aftermath are dangerous and random and cruel. She took his hands. Blaming yourself won't honor her. Living well, raising those boys with love and strength, that honors her. Daniel looked at their joined hands, at this woman who had appeared like grace itself when he had been drowning. Why did you agree, he asked. At the station. Why did you say yes? Sarah smiled sadly. Because I saw a man brave enough to ask for help, and because I was tired of running from the things I needed. What did you need? Purpose, belonging, a reason to get up in the morning that wasn't just survival. Their eyes met, held. Daniel almost leaned forward, almost closed the distance, almost. Sarah stood quickly. It's late, I should... Yes, of course, she fled to her room, heart pounding. Later that night, Matthew woke crying. Sarah went to him, found Daniel already there. Together they sat on either side of the small bed. Matthew reached for Sarah's hand, then Daniel's, held them both. Tell me about Mama, he whispered. His first words in months. Daniel's voice shook. She was kind, strong. She loved you more than anything in this world. Does she see us? Matthew asked. Every day, Sarah said softly. Every single day. Matthew looked at her. Are you going to leave? Sarah's throat closed. Not unless you want me to. I want you to stay forever. Daniel's hand tightened on hers across the small bed. Then I'll stay as long as I can, Sarah said. It wasn't a promise, but it was close enough. The marshal arrived at dawn. Sarah was making breakfast when she heard horses. Daniel moved to the window, went rigid. Stay inside, he said. But Sarah followed him onto the porch. Mr. Sullivan appeared from the barn, rifle casual in his hands. Sheriff Caldwell dismounted, followed by a federal marshal and a finely dressed couple in their 60s. The woman wore furs, the man wore cold eyes. Mr. Hayes, the sheriff said, this is Marshal Graves and Mr. and Mrs. Montgomery. They filed an emergency petition for custody of your sons. The world tilted. Mrs. Montgomery stepped forward, voice dripping false sympathy. Daniel, dear, we know you're struggling. Losing our daughter was devastating for all of us. But the boys, our grandsons, deserve stability, proper education, a moral environment. They have that here, Daniel said, voice dangerous. Mr. Montgomery's gaze swept to Sarah. With an unmarried woman of questionable character? Watch your mouth, Daniel growled. The marshal held up a hand. We have a court order, temporary custody pending a hearing. The boys come with us until the judge can evaluate the situation. No, Daniel moved forward. Mr. Sullivan stepped beside him. Don't make this difficult, the marshal said, not unkindly. From inside, Benjamin's voice. Papa? Sarah turned. Both boys stood in the doorway, eyes wide with terror. Mrs. Montgomery moved toward them. Come, darlings. We're taking you to a nice hotel with hot baths and suites. No, Benjamin screamed, ran to Daniel, wrapped himself around his father's legs. Matthew ran to Sarah. She picked him up, held him tight. This is cruelty, Sarah said, voice shaking. Can't you see they're terrified? We see a father who's allowed his home to fall into chaos, Mr. Montgomery said coldly, who's employed a woman with no references, no family. No, I have references, Sarah said, from every family in Topeka whose laundry I took in for 6 years. From the church where I taught Sunday school. Can you produce them? The marshal asked. Sarah's heart sank. All her references were in Topeka, 3 weeks travel away. The hearing is in 1 week, the marshal said. Until then, the boys stay with their grandparents at the Clearwater Hotel. That's the judge's order. Daniel looked at Sarah. His eyes were wild with helplessness. It's temporary, she said firmly. For the boys, for him, for herself. 1 week, then we get them back. But Matthew was screaming now, clinging to her neck. Benjamin fought as the marshal gently pried him from Daniel's legs. I want Sarah, Benjamin wailed. Papa, don't let them take us. Daniel fell to his knees. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I'll fix this. I promise. The boys were placed in the Montgomery carriage. Their screams echoed across the valley long after the dust settled. Sarah and Daniel stood alone in the yard. Then Daniel turned, walked to the barn, slammed the door. Sarah heard him breaking, heard the animal sound of a man destroyed. She went to him, found him on the floor, head in his hands, shoulders heaving. She sat beside him, said nothing, just stayed. 3 days passed. Daniel slept in the barn, stopped speaking, stopped eating. The empty whiskey bottle beside him told its own story. Sarah tried everything, bringing food he wouldn't touch, blankets he ignored. Mr. Sullivan tried reasoning with him. Nothing reached him. On the morning of the 4th day, Sarah stood at the kitchen window, watching the gray clouds gather. Rain would come by afternoon. The silence in the house pressed against her like a physical weight. In the yard, ranch hands moved quietly about their chores, their usual banter, silenced by the grief hanging over the property. She made a decision. In her small room, Sarah examined her worn traveling dress, the only proper attire she owned. It would draw too much attention in town. With determined steps, she retrieved Daniel's spare trousers from the laundry. They were far too large, but she tied them at the waist with rope and rolled the cuffs. She found his spare flannel shirt, a vest, and an old coat. The men's clothing felt strange, improper even, but practicality won out over propriety. In the barn, she found Mr. Sullivan saddling a horse. I need to ride to town, she said without preamble. The old man looked up, surprised not by her request, but by her attire. He studied her for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. You never ridden before coming here, he stated. It wasn't a question. I've had 3 weeks of lessons. Sullivan snorted. 3 weeks doesn't make a horsewoman. I need to see the boys, Sarah said, her voice breaking slightly. I can't just sit here while they're terrified and alone. Sullivan's expression softened. Take Willow, he said, gesturing to a dappled mare in the end stall. She's gentle but sure-footed. The trail gets muddy when it rains. He helped her saddle the mare, explaining each step patiently. When she was mounted, he handed her a small pistol. For emergencies, he said gruffly. Wolves sometimes come down from the hills this time of year. Sarah tucked it into her coat pocket, hoping she would not need it. I'll be back before dark, she promised. Sullivan adjusted her stirrups. Hayes would have my hide if anything happened to you. He'd have to speak first, Sarah said with a sad smile. The old man looked toward the back of the barn where Daniel sat immobile, staring at nothing. Some wounds go deeper than others, Miss Sarah. I've seen it before after the war. Men who couldn't find their way back. I'll find a way to reach him, Sarah vowed. But first, I need to see about the boys. The ride to Clearwater took longer than expected. Willow was indeed gentle, but Sarah's inexperience made for slow going. The mountain trail wound through pine forests and across small streams. Under different circumstances, she might have appreciated the beauty of the Montana wilderness. The golden aspen leaves against the dark evergreens. The distant snow-capped peaks. Today, her mind was fixed only on reaching town, on seeing Benjamin and Matthew. Rain began to fall when she was halfway there, a cold, steady drizzle that soaked through the coat. By the time she reached Clearwater, her teeth were chattering and her hands were stiff with cold. The town looked different in the rain. Mud puddles replaced dust, and few people ventured outside. Those who did gave her curious glances, a woman in men's clothing riding alone. Sarah dismounted at the hitching post outside the hotel, wincing at the stiffness in her legs. She tied Willow, then hesitated. Would she even be allowed inside dressed as she was? But it was too late to turn back. The Clearwater Hotel stood 3 stories tall, its brick facade and polished windows proclaiming it the finest establishment for 100 miles. Gas lamps illuminated the lobby despite the gray afternoon, casting a warm glow over the polished wood floors and velvet upholstery. Sarah entered, trying to project confidence despite her unusual appearance. A young man stood behind the front desk, eyeing her suspiciously as she approached. His starched collar and pomaded hair marked him as Eastern educated, likely brought west by the promise of opportunity. "May I help you?" His tone suggested she had taken a wrong turn. "I'm here to see the Montgomery boys," Sarah said, keeping her voice low. The clerk frowned. "The Montgomery party has not authorized any visitors." "Please," Sarah said, "I just need 5 minutes with them. I'm—" She hesitated. "I'm their stepmother." "Ma'am, I have strict instructions. No visitors." The clerk's gaze swept over her damp, masculine attire with clear disapproval. Sarah reached into her pocket, feeling the weight of the pistol. Instead, she found $2 silver, a small fortune in these parts. She placed them on the desk. "I'm their teacher," she improvised. "I've brought their school books." The clerk's eyes darted to the money, then back to Sarah's face. After a moment's hesitation, he palmed the coins. "Room 212, second floor. But if anyone asks, I never saw you." Sarah hurried up the carpeted staircase, her mud-splattered boots leaving traces on the plush red carpet. At the end of the hallway, she found room 212. She raised her hand to knock, then paused, hearing a child crying inside. The sound steeled her resolve. She rapped lightly on the door. A stern-faced woman in a starched uniform opened it. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her thin lips pressed into a disapproving line at the sight of Sarah. "Yes?" she asked sharply. "I've come to see Benjamin and Matthew," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. The woman's eyes narrowed. "No visitors allowed." From inside the room, a small voice called out, "Sarah?" Before the nanny could close the door, Sarah pushed past her into the room. It was opulently furnished with heavy curtains and ornate furniture, but it felt cold despite the fire in the grate. The room smelled of camphor and furniture polish, not the pine-scented soap the boys were accustomed to. Benjamin and Matthew sat on separate beds, dressed in new clothes that looked uncomfortable and stiff. Benjamin's face lit up at the sight of her, but a dark bruise marred his cheek. Matthew retreated to the corner of his bed, his eyes vacant once more, as if the progress of recent weeks had never happened. "What happened?" Sarah asked, going to Benjamin and gently touching his face. "I cried for Papa," he whispered, his eyes darting nervously to the nanny. "Grandfather said men don't cry." Sarah's blood boiled, but she kept her voice gentle. "Your Papa and I miss you both so much." "Is he coming to get us?" Benjamin asked, hope brightening his features. Sarah hesitated, unwilling to lie. "We're doing everything we can to bring you home." "You shouldn't be here," the nanny interrupted. "Mr. Montgomery was very clear." "I'll only stay a moment," Sarah promised. The nanny moved toward the door. "I'm calling Mr. Montgomery." "You do that," Sarah said, her voice ice. She turned her attention back to the boys kneeling between them. "I miss you both so much. Your Papa misses you too." "When can we go home?" Benjamin asked. "Soon," Sarah promised. "Very soon." Matthew remained silent, but his hand crept out, seeking hers. Sarah squeezed it gently, noting how cold his fingers felt. She spotted a familiar object tucked under his pillow, the wooden horse he always carried. At least they had allowed him that small comfort. "I need to go now," she said, hearing footsteps approaching in the hall. "But I'll be back. We'll bring you home." The door burst open. Mrs. Montgomery stood there, her face a mask of indignation. Behind her loomed her husband, tall and imperious in a tailored suit. His silver hair and carefully trimmed beard gave him the appearance of a distinguished patriarch, but his cold eyes revealed a different character. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" he demanded. Sarah stood, facing them squarely. "I came to see the children." "You have no right," Mrs. Montgomery said. Her expensive dress rustled as she moved further into the room, the scent of French perfume momentarily overpowering the camphor. "These are our grandsons." "They're terrified," Sarah replied. "Look at them. Look at Benjamin's face. How dare you strike a child?" "It was a correction," Mr. Montgomery said dismissively. "My daughter's sons will be raised properly, with discipline, something their father has clearly failed to provide." Their father loves them, Sarah said, and they love him. Love? Mr. Montgomery scoffed. What does that matter? These boys will inherit a significant fortune. They need proper guidance, proper education, not some backwoods upbringing by a failed rancher and his housekeeper. The last word dripped with contempt. They need their home, Sarah insisted. Their father. Their home will be with us in St. Louis, Mrs. Montgomery announced, where they'll have every advantage. Guards, Mr. Montgomery called out. Remove this woman immediately. Two men appeared in the doorway, both tall and broad-shouldered. One wore a pistol at his hip. Sarah looked at the boys one last time, trying to convey reassurance with her eyes. I'll be back, she promised. Be brave. The guards escorted her not just from the room, but from the hotel entirely, depositing her unceremoniously on the muddy street. Rain continued to fall. Sarah stood there a moment, trying to gather her thoughts, the cold seeping into her bones. The despair in Matthew's eyes haunted her. The bruise on Benjamin's cheek fueled her anger. As she untied Willow, she heard voices from the alley beside the hotel. Curiosity drove her to peer around the corner. Mr. Montgomery stood there with another man, both sheltering under the hotel's awning. The second man wore an expensive suit and carried a leather portfolio stamped with the Southern Pacific Railroad logo. Once we have guardianship, start clearing the south section immediately. Montgomery's voice carried clearly in the damp air. The railway line must go through before winter sets in. What about Hayes? The railroad man asked. He'll have no say once we control the boys' inheritance. The court date is set for Wednesday next week. Judge Harmon is an old friend. It's merely a formality. Sarah drew back, her mind racing. This wasn't about the boys at all. This was about the land. She mounted Willow with newfound urgency. She had to get back to the ranch, back to Daniel. They had 6 days to save their family. The ride back was miserable. Rain had turned to sleet and darkness was falling. Twice she nearly lost the trail, but Willow seemed to know the way. By the time she reached the ranch, Sarah was soaked through and shivering violently. Mr. Sullivan took one look at her and ordered one of the hands to prepare a hot bath while he stabled Willow. The boys, he asked as he helped her dismount. Frightened, Benjamin has been struck. Sarah's voice shook with cold and anger. And I discovered what the Montgomerys truly want. It's not the children. It's the land for the railroad. Sullivan's expression darkened. I suspected as much. That stretch of valley would save them miles of track. Sarah nodded. I need to tell Daniel. He hasn't moved all day, Sullivan warned. Then it's time he did, Sarah said firmly. She found Daniel in the barn, just as she had left him that morning. An empty whiskey bottle lay beside him. In his hand was the photograph of Margaret. His eyes were red-rimmed, vacant, as if he'd traveled somewhere deep inside himself and couldn't find the way back. The sight broke something in Sarah. She knelt before him, took his face in her cold hands. I saw them, she said without preamble. The boys. Benjamin has a bruise on his face. Matthew won't speak again. They're terrified. No response. Daniel's eyes remained unfocused. They hurt your children, Sarah said more forcefully, and you're here, drowning in guilt while they suffer. Still nothing. Frustration rose in her, mingled with fear. What if she couldn't reach him? What if Daniel was lost to them forever? I heard Montgomery talking, she continued, her voice rising. This isn't about the boys at all. It's about the land. The railroad wants to build through your property. The Montgomerys are using the children to get control of it. Daniel blinked slowly, some awareness returning to his eyes. We have 6 days, Daniel, Sarah said, her voice breaking. 6 days before they take your sons forever. I can't fight this alone. I need you. A long silence. Then so quietly she almost missed it. I failed them. What? Sarah leaned closer. I failed them, he repeated, his voice rough from disuse. I failed Margaret. I should have listened about the headaches. Should have taken her to the doctor. Now I've failed the boys. No, Sarah insisted, gripping his shoulders. You asked for help when you needed it. That isn't failure. That's courage. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since the boys had been taken. Why do you care? He asked hoarsely. This isn't your fight. You could walk away, go back to Topeka. Because I love them, Sarah said fiercely. She stopped herself. I love this home we've built together. All four of us. Something shifted in Daniel's eyes, a spark returning to their blue depths. Sarah didn't know if it was her words or simply the time had come for him to emerge from his darkness. She didn't care. She only knew they had to move forward. "We'll get them back," she promised. "But I need you with me. Benjamin and Matthew need their father." "How?" Daniel asked, the word containing all his doubt and fear. "We fight," Sarah said simply, "with every weapon we have." The barn door opened. Mr. Sullivan entered, bringing with him the scent of rain and pine. His weathered face grew grave when he saw them. "Miss Sarah, you're frozen through," he said. "And Mr. Hayes, you look like hell warmed over." Despite everything, Sarah laughed, a small sound of relief. Daniel's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Mr. Hayes," Sullivan continued, "there's something you should know. The judge set a hearing date, Wednesday next. If you want those boys back, there's only one way I see it happening." "What's that?" Daniel asked, his voice still rough. "You two need to marry. Today, if possible." Sullivan's expression was deadly serious. No judge in the territory would separate a legal family without cause. But an unmarried woman living in your house? He shook his head. That gives them all the ammunition they need. Daniel and Sarah exchanged a long look. Everything between them had happened so quickly. 6 weeks ago, they had been strangers. Now they were contemplating marriage to keep their fragile family together. "Sarah," Daniel said softly, "I can't ask this of you." "You're not asking," she replied. "I'm offering." Sullivan cleared his throat. "I sent for Reverend Jenkins. He should be here within the hour." "You assumed we'd agree?" Daniel asked. Sullivan snorted. "I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper, Daniel Hayes, and I've watched you two dance around each other for weeks. This just speeds things up a bit." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. Had her growing feelings for Daniel been so obvious? "Go get cleaned up, both of you," Sullivan ordered. "I'll have Mrs. Sullivan come up from the cookhouse. She can stand witness with me." The Reverend arrived as promised, bringing his wife as an additional witness. The kitchen was hastily tidied. Sarah changed into her best dress, still damp from the laundry line. She washed her face, combed her hair, and pinned it up as neatly as she could. Looking in the small mirror, she hardly recognized herself. 6 weeks ago, she had been bound for a loveless marriage of convenience to a cold merchant. Now she was entering another marriage of convenience, but one born of shared purpose and growing affection rather than obligation. Daniel shaved and put on a clean shirt. The transformation was remarkable. Even haggard from days of not eating, with the wild look of grief still haunting his eyes, he was handsome in a rugged way that Eastern men could never match. When he entered the kitchen, he stopped short at the sight of her, something like wonder crossing his face. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. "Thank you," Sarah replied, equally soft. Under the warm glow of kerosene lamps, with Mr. Sullivan and Mrs. Sullivan as witnesses, they exchanged simple vows. No music, no flowers, just honest promises spoken in quiet voices. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Daniel kissed Sarah's forehead gently. "Thank you," he whispered, "for saying yes again." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Ask me tomorrow. I'll say yes again." With the ceremony complete, they had 3 days to prepare for the hearing. Daniel threw himself into the preparations with newfound purpose. Sarah noticed how his shoulders had straightened, how the shadows under his eyes began to fade. They worked side by side, gathering documents, preparing their case. "We need to prove the Montgomerys have ulterior motives," Daniel said as they sat at the kitchen table surrounded by papers. "But my word against theirs won't be enough." "I overheard them," Sarah said, "but that's still just my word." Daniel frowned. "There must be something in writing. Montgomery is too careful a businessman not to have documentation." Sarah remembered something. "When I was cleaning your study last week, I found a locked drawer in your desk. What's in it?" "Old papers," Daniel said. "Things from when Margaret was alive. I haven't opened it since—" "May I?" Sarah asked gently. Daniel nodded, retrieved the key from his pocket watch chain. Together they went to his study. The drawer contained bundles of letters tied with ribbon, legal documents, and a small leather journal. "Margaret's diary," Daniel said softly, touching the cover. "I couldn't bear to read it after." Sarah placed her hand over his. "Maybe now is the time." As Daniel read through the journal, his face grew increasingly troubled. She knew, he said, about the headaches. She wrote about them for months before. She knew something was wrong but didn't want to worry me. Sarah squeezed his hand, offering silent support. That wasn't your fault, she said. Women hide their pain all the time. We're taught to. Beneath the journal lay a thick envelope marked Southern Pacific Railroad. Daniel opened it, scanning the contents. His expression hardened. 2 years ago, he said, Montgomery offered to buy the ranch. $15,000. I refused. He held up a map. This shows their planned railway route, right through our south pasture. And that's our evidence, Sarah said. He wants the land, not the boys. The next day, Daniel rode into town to consult with a lawyer while Sarah continued organizing their case. When he returned, his expression was grim. Lawyer says our chances are slim, he reported. Montgomery has connections. Judge Harmon is his old friend from St. Louis. Then we need more than just the railroad documents, Sarah said. We need witnesses who can testify to how the boys have improved since I came. People who can speak to your character. The town thinks I've lost my mind with grief, Daniel said bitterly. They think I'm unfit. Then we'll change their minds, Sarah insisted. They spent the next day gathering statements from the ranch hands, from the doctor who had attended Margaret, even from the general store owner who had seen the boys' improvement during their visits to town. Sarah wrote to her former employer in Topeka, requesting a character reference by telegram. Daniel visited neighboring ranchers, seeking their support. By the eve of the hearing, they had assembled as strong a case as possible. Still, uncertainty gnawed at them. The Montgomerys were wealthy, influential. The deck was stacked against them. That night, after an exhausting day of preparation, Sarah found Daniel standing on the porch, staring at the star-filled squeaking. What if we lose them? He asked without returning. Sarah joined him at the railing. We won't. You can't know that. No, she admitted, but I believe it. I have to. Daniel turned to her then. In the moonlight, his face was all plains and shadows. Why did you really say yes to this? He asked. To marrying me? Sarah considered her answer carefully. At first it was for the boys, she said honestly, but now, Shuan, she looked up at him. Now I think it was also for me, and for you. Daniel's hand found hers on the railing. I never thought I'd care for anyone again after Margaret, he said quietly. I thought that part of me died with her. And now? Sarah asked, barely breathing. Now I'm not so sure. His fingers intertwined with hers. Whatever happens tomorrow, Sarah, I want you to know that I'm grateful. For everything. They stood together in companionable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, drawing strength from each other for the battle to come. The day of the hearing dawned clear and cold. Sarah wore her best dress, freshly pressed. Daniel wore a suit that had belonged to his father, mothballed for years. The Hayes Ranch wagon carried them into town, Mr. Sullivan driving. The courthouse was packed. Half the town had turned out to witness the proceedings between the wealthy Montgomerys and the grieving rancher. Sarah felt the stares as they entered, heard the whispers. She held her head high, her hand firmly in Daniel's. Judge Harmon, 65 years old, with hawk-like eyes and a neatly trimmed white beard, presided. He called the court to order, then nodded to the Montgomerys' lawyer to begin. Mr. Blackwell, a sharp-featured man with cold eyes, painted Daniel as mentally unstable, still grieving his wife's death, unable to properly care for his children. He described Sarah as an opportunist with questionable intentions regarding the Hayes estate. Through it all, Daniel sat rigid, his jaw clenched. When his turn came, he declined the lawyer Sullivan had found, choosing instead to speak for himself. He walked to the witness stand, his steps steady. Your Honor, he began, his voice clear and strong. 8 months ago, I lost my wife. I lost my way. I was preparing to die every day, except I couldn't because 2 small boys needed me. He paused. I failed them, not because I didn't love them enough, but because grief had blinded me. The courtroom was utterly silent. Sarah Hayes came into our lives when we needed her most, he continued. She taught my sons to speak again, to laugh again. She taught me that asking for help isn't weakness. Mrs. Montgomery made a scoffing noise from her seat. A convenient time for a marriage. Daniel met her gaze steadily. We married 3 days ago, but I've wanted to marry her since the first week she stepped into our home. I was just too blinded by guilt and grief to recognize that I deserved a second chance. When Sarah's turn came, she spoke not just of the boys' progress, but of the evidence they had discovered. Your Honor, she said, I respectfully submit that this case is not about Benjamin and Matthew's welfare. It's about 3,000 acres of land and timber rights worth far more than Mr. Montgomery's offer of $15,000. She presented the railroad documents and the map showing the planned route. Mr. Montgomery stands to profit enormously if this railway goes through Hayes Ranch land. That is his true motivation for seeking custody. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Harmon frowned, studying the documents with narrowed eyes. Mr. Montgomery, is this accurate? He asked. Montgomery's face flushed. These allegations are absurd. We simply want what's best for our grandsons. Then perhaps we should ask the boys themselves, the judge said. Benjamin and Matthew were brought into the courtroom, still wearing the stiff new clothes. Benjamin's bruise had faded but was still visible. Sarah watched the judge notice it, his eyes narrowing slightly. Instead of asking them directly whom they wished to live with, the judge knelt down and asked, Boys, what do you remember about your mother? Benjamin answered softly, She sang to us, and made sweet bread on Sundays, and hugged us when we were sad. The judge nodded. And does Mrs. Hayes do these things too? Benjamin nodded vigorously. She sings, and she taught me to make bread, and she hugs us when we're scared. The judge turned to Matthew, who hadn't spoken since being taken from the ranch. And you, young man, do you have anything to say? Matthew looked at Sarah, then at Daniel. He took a deep breath and in a clear voice said, I want to go home with Papa and Sarah. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Harmon raised his hand for silence, then returned to his bench. He surveyed the Montgomerys with a cold stare. I have before me a purchase offer for the Hayes Ranch signed by you, Mr. Montgomery, and a railroad map showing a planned route through that property. Do you deny that these documents are genuine? This is irrelevant, Montgomery blustered. The welfare of the children. Answer the question, the judge interrupted. Montgomery's face darkened. The documents are genuine, but no further explanation needed, Judge Harmon said. He looked at Daniel and Sarah. I've heard enough. The boys will remain with Mr. and Mrs. Hayes. Petition for custody denied. The courtroom exploded in noise. Benjamin and Matthew broke free from their grandmother's grip and ran to Daniel and Sarah. The four of them embraced, a tangle of arms and tears and laughter. Around them, townspeople gathered, offering congratulations and support that had been absent just days before. Outside the courthouse, Sheriff Caldwell approached, hat in hand. Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Hayes, he said, clearing his throat. I was wrong about your family, and I apologize. Sarah nodded graciously. We all make judgments based on appearances, Sheriff. What matters is recognizing when we're wrong. As they prepared to leave town, Mr. Sullivan smiled for the first time in days. You did good, he told Daniel. Both of you. We're going home, Daniel said softly to the boys. All of us. Spring came to Hayes Ranch, bringing new life after the long winter. The snow melted from the mountains, wildflowers bloomed across the valley, and newborn calves wobbled after their mothers in the pastures. Sarah woke before dawn as always, listening to the birdsong outside her window. She started the coffee, mixed biscuit dough, and set the table. The house felt different now. Curtains hung in the windows, the mantel was dusted, and children's laughter echoed through the rooms. Benjamin appeared first, sleep rumpled and smiling. Morning, Sarah, he said, climbing onto his chair. Good morning, sweetheart. She smoothed his hair, still marveling at how quickly he had bounced back after returning home. Matthew followed, quiet as always, but no longer silent. Can we plant sunflowers today? He asked. By the fence? After your lessons, Sarah promised. But yes. Daniel entered last, kissed the top of her head as he passed. 6 months had transformed their relationship. What had begun as desperation had slowly, cautiously blossomed into something deeper. They still had separate rooms, still navigated carefully around certain topics, but something had shifted between them. A trust. A partnership that neither had expected. That evening, after the boys were asleep, Daniel asked Sarah to join him on the porch. The spring air was cool but not cold, fragrant with pine and new growth. Stars crowded the vast Montana sky, brighter than any Sarah had seen in her years in Topeka. Daniel cleared his throat. Do you remember your promise? At the station? Sarah nodded. 6 months as your housekeeper. It's been 6 months, he said quietly. Sarah's heart stuttered. Yes, she acknowledged. You're free to go, if that's what you want. His voice was carefully neutral, but his eyes watched her intently. Sarah looked out at the land that had become her home, thought of the boys asleep upstairs who had become her sons in all but blood. She thought of Daniel, who had started as a stranger and become, what? A friend certainly. A partner. Perhaps something more. No, she said simply. I don't want to leave. Relief flooded his features. Good, he said, because I don't want you to go. He reached for her hand. I know this began as an arrangement of necessity, but Sarah, these past months, he struggled for words. I never thought I'd feel this way again. What way? She asked softly. Like I have a future worth living for, he said. Like I'm not just existing, but alive again. Sarah understood perfectly. Before coming to the ranch, her life had been a series of duties, obligations, survival without joy. Now, each day held purpose, connection, belonging. I feel it too, she admitted. Daniel's hand tightened on hers. Stay, he said, not as my housekeeper, not just for the barn. Stay for me. Stay because maybe someday you could love me as I'm coming to love you. Sarah's breath caught. She thought of all the small moments that had led to this one. The first time Benjamin had called her mama without thinking. The way Matthew sought her out when he was troubled. The quiet evenings by the fire, Daniel reading aloud while she mended. The 1,000 daily rituals that had knit them together into a family. I already do, she whispered. Daniel drew her close then, kissed her properly for the first time. Not the gentle forehead kiss of their wedding day, but a real kiss full of promise and longing and hope. That night, Sarah moved her belongings from the small room off the kitchen to the master bedroom. They began their marriage in truth, not just in name. Two people who had found each other through loss, built something precious from the ashes of their former lives. As spring turned to summer, the ranch flourished. Sarah planted a kitchen garden with vegetables and herbs. The boys grew stronger, more confident. Benjamin developed a talent for storytelling, while Matthew revealed a gift for drawing. Daniel smiled more, laughed often. One warm evening in July, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson, Sarah took Daniel's hand and placed it gently on her stomach. We're going to need a bigger house, she said softly. Daniel's eyes widened. Are you certain? She nodded, joy and nervousness mingling in her smile. He gathered her close, pressed his face into her hair. Thank you, he whispered, for saying yes that day at the station. For saying yes every day since. I'll keep saying yes, Sarah promised, for as long as you keep asking. And she did, through the birth of their daughter in February, through the harsh winter that followed and the bountiful harvest the next fall, through all the years that stretched before them, filled with the ordinary miracles of family life on the Montana frontier. All because of a chance meeting at a train station, a desperate request, and the courage to say yes to an uncertain future. The Montana summer sun beat down on Hayes Ranch, turning the valley into a tapestry of gold and green. 5 years had passed since that fateful day at Clearwater Station, when a desperate father had asked a stranger to mother his children. What had begun as an arrangement of necessity had blossomed into a true family, bound by love rather than obligation. Sarah Hayes stood on the porch, watching 4-year-old Elizabeth chase butterflies in the garden. Her dark curls bounced with each determined step, so like her mother Margaret in appearance, but with Sarah's stubborn spirit. At 9 years old now, Benjamin and Matthew had grown tall and strong, their earlier trauma fading into distant memory. Benjamin had his father's confidence and easy laugh, leading the ranch hand's children in adventures across the property. Matthew remained the thoughtful observer, his sketchbook always in hand, capturing the mountains and wildlife with remarkable skill for a child his age. Mama, Elizabeth called, holding up a wildflower. Look what I found. Beautiful, sweetheart, Sarah replied, smiling at her daughter's excitement over simple pleasures. From the barn came the sounds of men working. Daniel's voice carried across the yard. instructing one of the new ranch hands on breaking a spirited colt. The Hayes Ranch had prospered these past years, expanding its boundaries and its reputation for fine horses. What had once been a struggling cattle operation was now one of the most successful mixed ranches in the territory, running cattle on the lower pastures while breeding and training horses that sold for top dollar throughout Montana and beyond. Sarah brushed flour from her apron, contemplating the apple pies cooling on the kitchen windowsill. The county fair was tomorrow, and she intended to defend her blue ribbon from last year. So much had changed from the uncertain young woman who had stepped off a train platform with nothing but a small trunk and desperate hope. The ranch itself had transformed as well. The house that once felt abandoned now glowed with life. Curtains hung at every window, colorful rag rugs covered the floors, and children's artwork adorned the walls alongside treasured family photographs. The gardens Sarah had planted that first year now supplied the kitchen with fresh vegetables throughout the growing season. Fruit trees, mere saplings when planted 3 years ago, now promised their first modest harvest. "Mail's here," Benjamin called, riding up on his pony. He waved an envelope. "From St. Louis." Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest. Though the Montgomerys had lost their custody battle, they still sent occasional letters and gifts to the twins. Daniel allowed this limited contact, believing the boys should know their mother's family despite the painful history. "Thank you, Benjamin," she said, taking the envelope. "Go wash up for lunch. Your sister, too." Benjamin nodded, then whistled for Elizabeth, who came running, her small hands filled with wildflowers and grasshoppers. Sarah examined the envelope, thick cream stationery with the Montgomery crest embossed in gold. She would give it to Daniel later, let him decide whether its contents were appropriate for the boys. Their relationship with their grandparents remained complicated, a careful dance of politeness and boundaries. The kitchen door opened, and Daniel stepped inside. 5 years had softened the hard edges of grief, replaced by laugh lines around his eyes. His hair was beginning to silver at the temples, but his strength remained undiminished. He crossed to Sarah, kissed her cheek. "Something smells wonderful," he said, eyeing the pies. "Not for you," Sarah warned, playfully swatting his hand. "Those are for judging tomorrow." Daniel chuckled. "Can't blame a man for trying." He noticed the envelope in her hand, his expression sobering. "From them?" Sarah nodded, handed it to him. "Just came." Daniel weighed the envelope in his hand, then slipped it into his pocket unopened. "I'll look at it later." "They still want to visit," Sarah said softly, "for the boy's birthday next month." "I know." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I just don't trust their motives." "It's been 5 years," Sarah reminded him. "The railroad went another route. Maybe they genuinely want to know their grandsons." Daniel sighed. "Maybe, but I remember Benjamin's bruised face. Some things are hard to forgive." Sarah touched his arm. "The decision is yours. But the boys are older now. They might want to know their mother's parents." "I'll think about it," Daniel promised, covering her hand with his own. "Now, where are those children of ours? I have news." Sarah called the children to the kitchen table where Daniel announced that a traveling photographer would visit the ranch next week. "Time we had a proper family portrait," he said, "for the parlor wall." The children cheered at the novelty, but Sarah felt a pang of uncertainty. The only portrait in the parlor was of Margaret, Daniel's first wife, a beautiful woman frozen in time. Though Sarah had made peace with Margaret's memory, encouraging the boys to speak of their mother and keeping her photograph where they could see it, the thought of her own image hanging beside Margaret's felt strange. Daniel seemed to read her thoughts, squeezing her hand under the table. "It's time," he said quietly. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Daniel opened the Montgomery letter in his study. Sarah sat nearby, mending one of Matthew's shirts. "They want to come for the birthday," Daniel confirmed, reading aloud, "and they've enclosed a bank draft for $100. A gift for the boys." "That's generous," Sarah said carefully. "It's blood money," Daniel muttered, but without his former bitterness. "But the boys are getting older. They ask questions about their mother's family. Perhaps it's time." "What changed your mind?" Daniel set down the letter. "Something Benjamin said yesterday. He asked if his mother would be sad that he can't remember her face anymore. He looks at her photograph, but it doesn't feel real to him." He ran a hand through his hair. "I've been so focused on protecting them that I might have kept them from something they need." Sarah nodded, understanding. They need to know where they came from. All of it, not just the parts we choose. I'll write back tomorrow, Daniel decided. They can visit, briefly, but they'll stay in town, not here. Sarah smiled, proud of his growth. The Daniel of 5 years ago would never have considered such a compromise. The next morning brought excitement as the family prepared for the county fair. Elizabeth wore her best dress, her dark curls tamed into braids tied with blue ribbons. The boys loaded Sarah's pies and preserves onto the wagon while Daniel hitched the team. The fairgrounds bustled with activity. Farmers displayed prized livestock, women arranged handcrafts and baked goods for judging, and children ran laughing between game booths. The Hayes family was greeted warmly by neighbors and townspeople. 5 years had transformed them from objects of scandal and pity to respected members of the community. While Daniel took the children to watch the horse races, Sarah arranged her entries in the domestic arts pavilion. As she adjusted her pie display, she overheard two women talking nearby. "Can you believe the Montgomerys are coming back to Clearwater?" one whispered. "After that shameful custody battle?" "I heard they're staying at the hotel next weekend," the other replied. "Apparently they've had a change of heart about their grandsons." "Or a change of strategy," the first woman said. "My husband says old Montgomery never gives up when he wants something. And with silver being discovered in the Black Hills last month, people are looking at these hills differently." Sarah's hands stilled. Silver? The women moved on, unaware she had overheard. A knot formed in her stomach. Were the Montgomerys truly seeking reconciliation, or did they have another motive? She tried to dismiss the thought as paranoia, but doubt lingered. That afternoon, as the family watched the rodeo competitions, Sheriff Caldwell approached their seats. "Hayes family," he greeted them warmly. 5 years had transformed their relationship from suspicion to respect. "Enjoying the fair?" "Very much," Daniel replied, "though I think my wife is nervous about the baking competition." "She'll win, as always," the sheriff said with a smile. His expression turned serious. "Could I have a word, Daniel? Privately?" The men stepped away while Sarah distracted the children with candied apples. She watched Daniel's face grow grave as the sheriff spoke, gesturing emphatically. When Daniel returned, his jaw was set in a hard line. "What is it?" Sarah asked once the children were out of earshot. "Montgomery's not just coming for a visit," Daniel said quietly. "He's bringing lawyers and surveyors." Sarah's blood chilled. "But why? The railroad went another route years ago." "Not the railroad this time. Silver was discovered last month in the Black Hills. Montgomery thinks there might be deposits on our land too." Daniel's eyes narrowed. Caldwell overheard them in the telegraph office in Helena last week. "They still believe they have a claim through the boys." "But that's absurd," Sarah protested. "The judge settled that years ago." "Laws change. Judges retire." Daniel looked troubled. "Montgomery has powerful friends in the territorial government now." The joy of the fair dimmed, overshadowed by this new threat. When they returned home that evening, despite Sarah's blue ribbons for best pie and best preserves, a tension hung over the family. After the children were asleep, Daniel and Sarah sat on the porch discussing their options. "We could refuse to let them visit," Sarah suggested. Daniel shook his head. "That would only make us look unreasonable if this ends up back in court. No, better to proceed as planned. Let them come, but we'll be prepared." "Should we tell the boys?" "Not yet," Daniel decided. "Let them enjoy their birthday without worry. We don't know for certain what Montgomery intends." The week passed quickly. The photographer came and went, leaving behind the promise of a family portrait to be delivered in a month's time. The ranch hands reported seeing strangers surveying the property boundary lines, but they disappeared when approached. Daniel rode the perimeter daily, increasingly concerned. On Friday, Mr. Sullivan brought news that the Montgomerys had arrived in Clearwater and taken rooms at the hotel. They had brought not only lawyers but a mining engineer from San Francisco. "They're not even pretending this is just about the pasa," Daniel said bitterly. That night, Sarah woke to find Daniel's side of the bed empty. She found him in his study, examining old property deeds by lamplight. "You should sleep," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I can't." He rubbed his eyes. "I keep thinking about how close we came to losing the boys 5 years ago. I won't risk that again." "We're stronger now," Sarah reminded him. "This is our home, our family. No one can take that from us." Daniel pulled her onto his lap, buried his face in her hair. I couldn't have done any of this without you, he whispered. You know that, don't you? We did it together, Sarah corrected gently. And that's how we'll face whatever comes next. The Montgomerys arrived at Hayes Ranch the following afternoon, the day before the twins' birthday. Their carriage was ostentatious, drawn by 4 matching gray horses with silver harnesses. Mr. and Mrs. Montgomery stepped out, older but no less imperious than Sarah remembered. They were accompanied by a younger man in an expensive suit whom they introduced as Mr. Hollister, their lawyer. Just a precaution, Montgomery explained smoothly when Daniel raised an eyebrow. Legal matters can be so complicated these days. The boys greeted their grandparents with cautious politeness. 5 years had erased most of their memories of the Montgomerys, leaving them curious but wary. Elizabeth hid behind Sarah's skirts, suddenly shy. And this must be your daughter, Mrs. Montgomery said, her voice cool. She looks very much like Margaret. She has Sarah's spirit, Daniel replied, placing a protective hand on Elizabeth's shoulder. The afternoon proceeded with strained courtesy. The Montgomerys presented lavish gifts to the twins, silver pocket watches engraved with their initials. They asked polite questions about the boys' education and interests, exclaimed appropriately over Matthew's drawings and Benjamin's stories of ranch life. Not once did they mention mining or silver. But Sarah noticed how Montgomery's eyes surveyed the property, how he asked seemingly casual questions about the southern boundaries. She saw him exchange meaningful glances with his lawyer when Daniel described the creek that ran through the valley. As the visit drew to a close, Montgomery finally revealed his purpose. We'd like to take the boys back to the hotel for dinner, he announced. Perhaps they could stay the night, get to know their grandmother properly. Daniel stiffened beside Sarah. I'm afraid that won't be possible, he said evenly. Tomorrow is their birthday. We have plans as a family. Surely you could spare them for one evening, Mrs. Montgomery pressed. After all, we've come such a long way. The answer is no, Daniel said, his tone brooking no argument. You're welcome to join us tomorrow for the birthday celebration, but the boys will remain here. Montgomery's pleasant facade cracked slightly. I see some things haven't changed, he said coldly. Still keeping them isolated, are you? Protecting my family isn't isolation, Daniel replied. Now, if you'll excuse us, it's getting late. After the Montgomerys departed, promising to return for the birthday dinner the next day, Daniel paced the parlor like a caged wolf. They're planning something, he said. I can feel it. But what can they do? Sarah asked. The custody issue was settled years ago. They wouldn't have brought a lawyer if they didn't think they had some legal angle. Daniel stopped pacing, his expression resolute. First thing tomorrow, I'm riding to Helena to see Judge Brandon. He's an old friend of my father's. He'll know what legal maneuvers Montgomery might try. But tomorrow is the boy's birthday, Sarah protested. Which is precisely why I think Montgomery will make his move then, Daniel said. I need to be prepared. I'll be back before the party, I promise. Daniel left before dawn, riding his fastest horse. Sarah spent the morning preparing for the birthday celebration, trying to hide her anxiety from the children. She baked a chocolate cake, the twins' favorite, and helped Elizabeth make paper decorations for the dining room. Around noon, an unexpected visitor arrived. Sheriff Caldwell dismounted in the yard, his expression grave. Mrs. Hayes, he said, removing his hat, is your husband at home? He rode to Helena early this morning, Sarah replied, her heart sinking. What's happened? Caldwell hesitated. I'm not sure how to say this, ma'am. The Montgomerys filed papers this morning. They're seeking to have your marriage declared invalid. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. What? On what grounds? They claim you were still legally betrothed to Wallace in Topeka when you married Hayes, Caldwell explained. Something about a contract signed by your father. That's absurd, Sarah protested. There was no legal marriage, only an arrangement to settle a debt. Nevertheless, they've convinced Judge Wilson to hear the case, Caldwell said. If successful, it would invalidate your marriage and therefore your status as the boy's stepmother. Sarah gripped the porch railing for support. And then they'd challenge Daniel's fitness as a single father. Caldwell nodded grimly. Exactly. When is the hearing? Monday morning. They're moving fast. Caldwell shifted uncomfortably. There's more, Mrs. Hayes. They've filed an emergency injunction preventing the removal of the children from the county until the matter is resolved. They can't take them? Sarah asked, panic rising. No, no, Caldwell assured her. Nothing like that, but it means you can't leave Clearwater County with the boys. They're trying to keep you from taking them somewhere beyond the court's jurisdiction. After the sheriff left, promising to ride to Helena to find Daniel, Sarah sank into a kitchen chair, her mind racing. How could the Montgomerys have learned about Wallace? She had never spoken of him to anyone in Clearwater, except Daniel. The answer came to her suddenly. The telegram she'd sent to her former employer in Topeka during the first custody battle, requesting a character reference. The Montgomerys must have sent someone to Topeka afterward. Digging into her past, Sarah gathered herself. She would not allow fear to ruin the boy's birthday. Tomorrow was time enough to worry about legal battles. Today belonged to Benjamin and Matthew. By mid-afternoon, the birthday preparations were complete. The dining room was festooned with paper chains and wildflowers. The chocolate cake stood proudly on the sideboard. Small gifts wrapped in brown paper and colorful string were arranged on the table. The children played in the yard, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around them. Sarah watched them through the window, determination replacing her initial panic. No court would separate her from these children. Not after 5 years. Not after everything they had survived together. Daniel returned at sunset, his face grim. He had indeed heard about the Montgomerys' legal maneuver and had spent hours consulting with Judge Brandon in Helena. It's a desperate ploy, Daniel told Sarah when they had a moment alone, but a clever one. If they can invalidate our marriage, they'll argue that the original custody ruling no longer applies since the family circumstances have changed. Can they do that? Sarah asked. Not if I can help it, Daniel said firmly. Judge Brandon is sending telegrams to Topeka tonight, seeking documentation that you were never legally married to Wallace. Just an informal arrangement. But that could take days, Sarah worried, which is precisely what Montgomery is counting on, Daniel agreed. He wants to create uncertainty, use it to strengthen his position about the boys' welfare. And the silver? Daniel's expression darkened. That's what this is really about. Judge Brandon confirmed that a significant silver deposit was discovered last month just 20 miles from here. Montgomery believes our South Ridge might contain similar deposits. What do we do now? We celebrate our son's birthday, Daniel said with forced lightness, and we show Montgomery that we're not intimidated. Judge Brandon will arrive Monday morning to testify on our behalf. Until then, we carry on as normal. The Montgomerys arrived for the birthday dinner precisely on time, their lawyer in tow. If they expected the Hayes family to be in disarray, they were disappointed. Sarah greeted them with perfect composure, Daniel with cold courtesy. The celebration proceeded with an undercurrent of tension that the children, fortunately, seemed oblivious to. Benjamin and Matthew blew out their candles, opened their gifts, and chattered excitedly about turning 9 years old. Elizabeth, not to be outdone, announced that her birthday was in 6 months, and she expected an even bigger cake. Throughout the evening, Montgomery made seemingly innocent remarks that carried veiled threats. These mountains hold such potential, he commented, gazing out the window at the southern ridge. A man could make a fortune with the right investments. Or lose one, Daniel replied evenly. As the Montgomerys prepared to leave, Montgomery took Daniel aside. Sarah, serving coffee nearby, overheard their conversation. You know why I'm here, Hayes, Montgomery said quietly. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Sell me the South Ridge, $5,000 an acre, more than generous. Not interested, Daniel replied. Think of your children, Montgomery pressed, their future, their education. I am thinking of them, Daniel said. I'm teaching them that some things aren't for sale. Family, home, integrity. Montgomery's face hardened. Admirable principles. Let's see if they hold up in court on Monday. After the Montgomerys departed, Daniel and Sarah sat on the porch in the gathering darkness, speaking in low voices to avoid alarming the children. They're desperate, Daniel observed. Montgomery wouldn't have shown his hand so clearly otherwise. What if they win? Sarah asked, voicing her deepest fear. Daniel took her hand. They won't, but even if something goes wrong with the hearing, I've taken precautions. He reached into his pocket, produced a folded document. I had Judge Brandon witness this today. It's a legal adoption petition. If our marriage is somehow invalidated, you would still be the boy's legal mother. Sarah unfolded the paper with trembling hands, read the formal language that declared Benjamin and Matthew Hayes to be legally adopted by Sarah Bennett Hayes. Tears blurred her vision. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel pulled her close. "Family protects its own," he said simply. Sunday passed in nervous anticipation. Daniel rode the property boundaries, checking for signs of trespassers or surveyors. Sarah kept the children occupied with games and stories, determined not to let them sense the tension. That evening, as Sarah tucked the boys into bed, Benjamin asked unexpectedly, "Mom, are we in trouble?" Sarah sat on the edge of his bed. "What makes you ask that, sweetheart?" "Grandfather kept asking strange questions yesterday," Benjamin said, "about the creek and the ridge, and I heard you and Papa talking last night." Sarah hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Your grandparents think there might be something valuable on our land. They want to buy part of it, but Papa doesn't want to sell." "Because it's our home?" Matthew asked from the other bed, his perceptive dark eyes searching her face. "Exactly," Sarah confirmed. "This land has been in the Hayes family for a long time. Your papa wants to keep it that way." "Good," Benjamin declared with his father's determination. "I don't want to leave." "Me neither," Matthew agreed softly, clutching his sketchbook. "I haven't drawn all the mountains yet." Sarah kissed their foreheads. "No one is going anywhere," she promised, hoping it was a promise she could keep. Monday dawned clear and hot. Daniel and Sarah dressed in their best clothes for the hearing. Mr. Sullivan would stay with the children, with strict instructions not to leave the property under any circumstances. As they prepared to depart for town, a rider appeared on the horizon, galloping hard toward the ranch. Daniel reached for his rifle, but soon relaxed as he recognized Sheriff Caldwell. The sheriff dismounted in a cloud of dust, his expression urgent. "Hayes," he called, "there's been a development. Judge Wilson collapsed this morning. Heart trouble." "The hearing?" Daniel asked. "Postponed," Caldwell replied, "but that's not why I rode out. Montgomery's men were seen heading toward your South Ridge an hour ago, 4 of them, carrying surveying equipment." Daniel's face darkened. "They're trespassing and violating the terms of their own injunction," Sarah added. "The children are supposed to remain in the county, but no one said anything about restricting access to our land." "Exactly," Caldwell agreed. "Montgomery's trying to gather evidence of mineral deposits while the legal issue is unresolved." Daniel was already striding toward the barn. "I'll handle this." "Daniel," Sarah called, concerned, "be careful." "Always," he promised, saddling his horse with practiced efficiency. "Caldwell, would you escort my wife to town? She should speak with our lawyer." "I'll come with you," Sarah insisted to Daniel. "No," he said firmly. "If this turns ugly, I need to know you're safe." Reluctantly, Sarah agreed. She watched Daniel ride away, a knot of fear tightening in her stomach. The Montgomerys had proven themselves ruthless adversaries before. What would they do when confronted on private property? In town, Sarah met with their lawyer, explaining the latest developments. As they discussed strategy for the postponed hearing, a commotion erupted outside. Sarah rushed to the window to see a crowd gathering in the street. "What's happening?" she asked a passerby. "Shooting up at Hayes Ranch," the man replied. "Someone's hurt bad." Sarah's world tilted. Without a word to the lawyer, she ran toward the livery stable, desperate for a horse. Sheriff Caldwell intercepted her, his expression grave. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "calm yourself. We don't know who's hurt." "I need to go home," Sarah insisted. "Now." Caldwell helped her mount his own horse, then climbed up behind her. They rode hard for Hayes Ranch, covering the distance in half the time it would normally take. As they approached, Sarah's heart stuttered at the sight of several horses in the yard. Men stood in clusters, talking in low voices. She dismounted before the horse fully stopped, running toward the house. "Daniel," she called. "Daniel." Mr. Sullivan met her on the porch, his weathered face pale. "He's inside, Mrs. Hayes, with the doctor." Sarah pushed past him, bursting into the parlor. Daniel lay on the sofa, his shirt open, a blood-stained bandage wrapped around his shoulder. Dr. Warren bent over him, administering to the wound. The children huddled in a corner, Elizabeth crying softly, the boys white-faced but stoic. "Daniel," Sarah gasped, falling to her knees beside him. His eyes opened, focused on her with effort. "I'm all right," he managed, "just a scratch." "A bullet wound is hardly a scratch, Mr. Hayes," the doctor corrected. "But he's right that it's not life-threatening. Clean through the shoulder, missed anything vital." What happened? Sarah demanded, looking between Daniel and the other men in the room. One of the ranch hands, a young man named Joe, stepped forward. Montgomery's men were drilling on the South Ridge, ma'am, taking samples. Boss rode up and ordered them off. Words were exchanged. Then one of their men, not the surveyors, another fellow they brought along, pulled a gun. They shot you? Sarah asked Daniel, horrified. After I disarmed one of them, Daniel admitted. It got heated. What happened to Montgomery's men? Sarah asked. Two are locked in the sheriff's office, Joe replied. The shooter got away. Montgomery himself wasn't there. The doctor finished his work, giving Sarah instructions for changing the bandage and signs of infection to watch for. Keep him quiet for a few days, he advised. No riding, no exertion. After the doctor left, Sarah sent the children to the kitchen with Mr. Sullivan's wife for cookies and milk. Finally, alone with Daniel, she allowed her composure to crack. You could have been killed, she said, voice breaking. But I wasn't, he replied, reaching for her hand, and there's good news mixed with the bad. Montgomery's men crossed a line. Trespassing, drilling without permits, and now armed assault. Caldwell said it changes everything legally. The shooting indeed changed everything. Judge Wilson, recovered from his health scare, dismissed Montgomery's petition outright when he learned of the violence. The territorial marshal arrived from Helena to investigate, and Montgomery's hired gunman was captured trying to flee to Idaho. Under questioning, the gunman implicated Montgomery directly, claiming he had been hired specifically to intimidate the Hayes family. More damning still, he revealed that he'd been instructed to make sure Hayes couldn't testify on Monday. Clear evidence of premeditated harm. The mining samples, tested by an independent assayer from Butte, showed traces of silver, though far less concentrated than Montgomery had hoped. It was valuable, but not the motherlode he had imagined. Montgomery attempted to distance himself from his men's actions, but the evidence mounted against him. His lawyer abandoned the case when bribery allegations surfaced. A telegram from the St. Louis prosecutor's office revealed that Montgomery had faced similar charges years earlier. Charges mysteriously dropped after witnesses disappeared. A grand jury was convened, resulting in indictments against Montgomery for conspiracy, attempted murder, and fraud. Daniel testified from a wheelchair, still weak from his wound, but determined to see justice done. Sarah described the pattern of intimidation spanning 5 years. Even Benjamin testified, his young voice steady as he recounted his grandfather's questions about the property boundaries. Throughout the proceedings, the Hayes family found unexpected allies. Townspeople who had once whispered about their unconventional beginning now stood firmly behind them. Neighboring ranchers offered to patrol the Hayes boundaries. The storekeeper extended credit for as long as needed. 2 weeks after the shooting, as Daniel's wound began to heal, the grand jury returned its verdict. Montgomery was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison. His wife, though not charged, was thoroughly disgraced. She fled Clearwater the night of the verdict, abandoning their hotel bill and most of their luggage. Word reached the Hayes Ranch a month later that Montgomery had suffered an apoplectic fit on the train to prison and died before reaching his destination. Mrs. Montgomery sent a brief, formal note expressing regret for her husband's actions and renouncing any further claim on her grandsons. With it came a substantial bank draft, labeled simply, "For the boy's education." "Do we accept it?" Sarah asked as they sat on the porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Daniel considered the question seriously. "I think we do," he said finally. "Not for us, but for them. We'll put it in trust for when they're older." "And Mrs. Montgomery, should we allow her to visit someday?" "Perhaps," Daniel said, "when the boys are old enough to decide for themselves. She's their only link to Margaret now." That autumn, with Daniel fully recovered, they hired a mining engineer to assess the silver deposits properly. The engineer confirmed what the initial tests had shown, a modest but viable vein running through the South Ridge. Benjamin and Matthew reacted differently to the news. Benjamin, practical and forward-thinking, peppered the engineer with questions about how deep they would dig and what machines they would use. Matthew, however, grew quiet, his eyes troubled as he gazed toward the ridge that had nearly cost their father his life. That night, Sarah found him sitting alone on the porch steps. "Are you worried about the mine?" she asked gently, joining him. Matthew nodded. "What if bad people come back because of it? What if it changes everything? Sarah wrapped an arm around his shoulders. Your father won't let that happen. Remember how he faced down your grandfather to protect our home? This mine will be different. It will be ours on our terms. The next morning, Daniel took both boys to the ridge, showing them exactly where the small mine would be placed, carefully explaining how they would protect the streams and forests they loved. Gradually, Matthew's apprehension transformed into cautious interest, especially when Daniel suggested he might document the project through his drawings. A record for the future, Daniel called it, and the idea that his art could serve a purpose beyond beauty sparked something new in the sensitive boy. Not enough for Montgomery's railroad cronies to bother with, the engineer explained, but plenty valuable for a family operation. Daniel decided to develop the mine himself using local men and sustainable methods rather than the destructive techniques larger companies employed. He studied mining journals, consulted experts, and designed a system that would preserve the land while extracting its wealth. I won't tear up this valley for quick profit, he told Sarah. This is our children's heritage. By spring of the following year, the Hayes Silver Mine employed 15 local men, working on a profit-sharing arrangement Daniel devised. The income, while not extravagant, allowed for improvements to the ranch they had long deferred. Sarah insisted on using the first profits for the community. We've been given so much, she said. It's time to give back. Together, they established a scholarship at the Territorial College for local students who couldn't afford tuition. They donated funds to build a proper schoolhouse in Clearwater, replacing the drafty cabin that had served for years. When drought struck neighboring ranches, Hayes wagons delivered hay and supplies without fanfare. At home, the mine's success brought modest comforts. A proper kitchen with a modern stove replaced the ancient hearth that had smoked on windy days. The house gained a library filled with books for the children's education. Daniel built a studio with northern light where Matthew could pursue his growing artistic talent. On Benjamin's 10th birthday, Daniel presented him with a yearling colt. Time you raised your own horse, he said, watching the boy's eyes widen with pride. Not to be outdone, Matthew received an easel and real oil paints ordered from Chicago. Elizabeth, though only 5, demanded something special too, and was delighted with a kitten from the barn's latest litter. The family portrait arrived that same week, beautifully framed. Sarah hesitated when Daniel suggested hanging it beside Margaret's photograph over the mantel. Are you certain? She asked. Completely, Daniel replied, his voice gentle. This house holds our past and our present. Margaret will always be part of our family story, but you, Sarah, you're our future. Together they hung the portrait, Daniel standing tall and proud, Sarah seated with Elizabeth on her lap, the boys flanking them on either side. A family created not by blood, but by choice, by love, by the courage to say yes to an uncertain future that cold day at Clearwater Station 5 years before. As winter approached, bringing the first dusting of snow to the mountains, Sarah made an announcement that brought voice to the entire family. A new Hayes would join them in the spring. She was expecting another child. I hope it's a boy, Elizabeth declared emphatically. I don't want to be the only girl anymore. I thought you liked being the only princess, Benjamin teased, ruffling her curls. I changed my mind, Elizabeth replied with all the dignity a 5-year-old could muster. I hope it's healthy, Daniel said that night as they lay together, his hand gentle on Sarah's still flat stomach. And as strong as its mother. And as kind as its father, Sarah added, nestling against him. The winter passed peacefully. The Hayes family cocooned in their warm home while snow blanketed the valley. The mine operated on a reduced schedule, the men taking turns to ensure no one family went without income. Daniel spent more time with the children, teaching Benjamin ranch management and encouraging Matthew's artistic pursuits. Elizabeth followed Sarah everywhere, practicing to be a mama, she announced. Though only 5, Elizabeth had already established her unique place among her siblings. To Benjamin, she was his devoted audience, gasping at the right moments during his adventurous tales and proudly announcing to visitors that her big brother could rope anything that moves. With Matthew, she shared a gentler bond, sitting quietly beside him for hours as he sketched, sometimes adding her own colorful scribbles to the corners of his less important drawings. The twins, now 9, had taken their role as older brothers seriously, teaching Elizabeth to identify bird calls and showing infinite patience as she followed them around the ranch. Their protective instincts, forged in shared grief long before she was born, extended naturally to their little sister, who had never known a day without their love and watchfulness. Spring came early that year. The snow melted, creeks ran high, and wildflowers carpeted the valley in a riot of color. In April, just as the first columbines bloomed on the hillside, Sarah gave birth to a son. They named him Joseph Sullivan Hayes, honoring the old foreman who had stood beside them through every trial. "Never thought I'd have a namesake," Sullivan said gruffly, awkwardly holding the infant while the other children crowded around, especially not one so small. "He'll grow," Daniel assured him, "and he'll know the man he's named for." As the years passed, the Hayes family prospered, not in ostentatious wealth, but in the things that mattered most: love, purpose, community. Benjamin grew into a capable young man, eventually taking over much of the ranch's daily management. Matthew's artistic talent flourished. By 16, his landscapes hung in galleries as far away as Denver. Elizabeth became a spirited young woman who could ride as well as any ranch hand, instill charm at the county social. Young Joseph, to everyone's surprise, showed a gift for numbers and mechanics, constantly tinkering with the mine's equipment to improve its efficiency. Mrs. Montgomery visited once when the twins turned 12. The meeting was awkward but healing. She brought photographs of Margaret as a child, stories of her youth, pieces of family history the boys had never known. Though she never returned, she maintained a cordial correspondence with the family until her death some years later. The silver mine eventually played out, as such things do, but not before providing enough income to diversify the ranch operations and establish trust funds for each child's education. More importantly, it had been developed with care and foresight, leaving the land healthy and productive for future generations. On a golden autumn day, 15 years after Sarah first arrived at Hayes Ranch, she stood on the porch watching her family in the yard below. Daniel, now 50, still strong despite a slight limp from his old wound, was showing Joseph how to saddle a pony. Benjamin, 24 and recently engaged to the school teacher's daughter, was discussing cattle prices with Sullivan, now stooped with age but still sharp-minded. Matthew, home from art school in Chicago, sketched the scene, while Elizabeth, a lovely girl of 19, read aloud to him from a novel. "Penny for your thoughts," Daniel said, coming to stand beside her. "Just counting my blessings," Sarah replied. "I never imagined this life when I stood on that train platform." "Do you ever regret it?" Daniel asked. "Saying yes to a desperate stranger?" Sarah smiled, linking her arm through his. "Not for a single moment." Daniel kissed her temple, his lips lingering. "Providence," he said softly. "Providence," she agreed. In later years, when their grandchildren gathered around the fireplace on winter evenings, they would beg for the train station story. Daniel would tell it, his voice deepening with age but his eyes still bright when they fell on Sarah. He spoke of desperation and courage, of a woman who stepped off a train and into uncertainty, of children healing from loss, of battles fought and won. But the real story, he always concluded, isn't about silver mines or court battles or even saving the ranch. It's about saying yes when everything in you wants to say no. It's about building something beautiful from broken pieces. It's about family, not just the one you're born into, but the one you choose day after day, year after year. And Sarah, her hair silver now, but her spirit undimmed, would add, it's about faith, in yourself, in others. In the future you can't see but choose to believe in anyway. The Hayes Ranch stands to this day, not as a monument to wealth or power, but as testament to something far more enduring. The courage to say yes to an uncertain future, the strength to build something lasting from moments of desperation, and the wisdom to recognize that family is not defined by blood, but by love, choice, and unwavering commitment through all of life's challenges.